if I'm neglecting you in the distribution of material, just say something. I'm not meaning to skip anybody or miss anybody. I'm feeding material for this class kind of as we go, so if you were gone or something, I might miss you or forget who I gave it to, and I apologize. So this week we are trying to finish up looking at Genesis 1 and 2, and we'll see how far we get with the next chapter, Genesis 3, and then if we do happen to finish there or get into there, Mike is going to be taking over. Next week I'm not going to be here, so Mike will be taking over for next week. And so wherever we leave off today, he's going to pick up. So I handed out I called it week 3 to 4 because I don't really know where we're going to be for those. So I handed that out. Whether or not you start this fully or get into it all with Mike next week, or he's finishing week number 2 and then going into 3. But the next lesson material, as you see there, we'll be looking at later on Cain and Abel, chapters 3 and 4. And so the two big things that happen in those chapters coming up in the future of Genesis is Cain and Abel, and then we see some genealogy in those early chapters. So we're going to look at the significance of that genealogy. So you might want to read Genesis 4 and 5, and then Luke chapter 3. And you'll see there 23 and 38. That's the genealogy that's recorded in Luke that kind of aligns with some of the genealogy that we see in Genesis. And we're going to look at the significance of that. Remember, the whole purpose of this study is we're trying to connect Genesis from the beginning, the intention of God in the beginning of what's in Genesis, and the intention in of course, His creation, and everything really pointing to Christ. And we're going to try to make that connection all throughout. So, again, just a few reminders. Stay reading, stay ahead. It helps with the flow of what we're doing. And hopefully you did some of your homework for today. I asked you to look at, if you remember, find the references to snakes and serpents in the Bible. I also asked you to list the consequences of the first sin and things like that. So if you stay ahead and do those things, we can go through some of the things a little quicker. And I don't mean to rush through topics. If there is a topic, again, that you just really want to, I really feel like we need to dig into that deeper, send me a text, give me a phone call, tell me afterwards, and we'll make sure we get it, hammered down. If there's something you really want to get into, or something you just have a question on yet that, I don't really understand that. The nice thing about this class is we can slow down, we can go through that if we need to, and then pick back up where we left off. All right, is that okay with everybody? Okay, so we left off, I forgot my other class notes, but I think I remember well enough. We're looking at chapter 1 and 2, and I think the last couple of things from the previous lesson that we didn't get to, I believe I had a question on there. Why did God create woman the way that He did, and do you see any significance in that? I think that's where we left off. Does that sound right? Go ahead, Robert.
Probably that we're both independent or dependent on one another.
Dependent on each other, right?
Dependent.
Yeah.
Right.
Important distinction, yeah.
So that equality argument, you need woman to bear children, right? For man.
Yep.
So, but then you have the woman came from man. So
Right.
It's a full circle.
All right, so let's look at the end of chapter 2. Let's see. Where does it start? I think about 18 is where we really start seeing the conversation about man and woman, right? In 18, the Lord said, "It's not good for man to be alone. I'll make him a helper suitable for him." Out of the ground, Lord God formed every beast of the field and every bird of the sky. Why in 18 does He say, why do you think He says it wasn't good for man to be alone?
Because He created.
Go ahead.
I think it has to do with the way in which He created us naturally.
Yeah.
We see companionship as one of those things. That is relatability. Animals and people relate in ways, but not like people, and the woman serves in that exact capacity for companionship, but also for procreation, which was not part of, something that you could do with the animal kingdom,
Yeah.
or animal world.
Yeah, there's multiple facets of it, but definitely the procreation, companionship. Go ahead, Matthew.
It's a very important question to go into and to look at, especially when you realize that the very first thing in all of creation that God calls not good is for man to be alone.
Right. Everything else before was good. Yeah.
Even darkness, he called good. On the first day, he created light in conjunction with darkness and called the light and the darkness good.
Right.
But all the way down where Adam is alone, he says, it is not good for man to be alone.
Right.
Let's make him a companion.
Right. And you remember in chapter 1 also God said, let us make man in our image. So we're created in God's image, right? And we have God as the Father, we have Jesus, and we have the Holy Spirit, all present in chapter 1. And so there's companionship in that sense too, not making some sort of, obviously the husband and wife relationship is different than God as we understand God, but again, there's companionship there. So we're made in his image, and we have God, and we also have his Son, and we have his Spirit. So there's companionship, I think, seen in the image of God as well. So there's lots of things, or lots of reasons why. And I think just in general, God understood that the man that he made, this is not going to work long term for him to be alone, right? And so he understands that a man is going to need a helper. Out of the ground, he said, out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every bird of the sky, and brought them to the man to see what he'd call them. And whatever the man called a living creature, it was made in his name. The man gave names to the cattle and the birds of the sky, etc. So he talks about God making also all the creatures, and Adam really being in charge of naming all of them, which is kind of fascinating to me. But 21, the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall on man. He slept. He took one of his ribs, and closed up the flesh in its place. And the Lord God fashioned into a woman the rib which he had taken from the man, and brought her to the man. And the man said, "This now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. And she shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. For this reason man shall leave his father and his mother, and be joined to his wife. They shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed." And so this distinction here is Adam was formed from where? Do you remember? The dust of the earth, right? The ground, right? Adam was formed from that. And also, as we saw just reading there in 19, God created every beast out of the earth as well, right? But the distinction here, woman is not created in that way, is she? So very interesting that she is created out of the man. And I think, again, this is really pointing to God's intention in design and God's intention in this relationship that he wants between man and woman, then or now or forever. Forever, of course. The trouble with these, the trouble in our culture, the good thing about these passages, from an evangelistic standpoint, or when we are talking to our coworkers and our friends and whatever, the concept of what man and woman are and what marriage is and a husband and a wife has that changed in your lifetime at all? Anybody notice anything changing? Okay. So you've noticed there's some changes, right? So it's very, unfortunately, a subject that's just not really understood anymore. So the importance, again, of why do we understand, our Old Testament scriptures, why do we understand Genesis right from the beginning? This is the intention that God had. So this passage is incredibly important, and this concept incredibly important to understand about man and woman, because, again, it is going to set the foundation for the rest of creation, for the rest of time. And God's intention from the beginning was that as we just read, this is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She's called woman. And then, as he says, for this reason, man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife. This is God's intention from the very beginning. So you could take out all passages in the scriptures past this about marriage and everything, right? About what a man is, a woman, and unnatural lusts and all that. Could you almost take all of it out, right? I'm not saying we should, but could we eliminate it from the scriptures and just study that one verse, right? And we'd have an understanding of what, I'm trying to make a point, we'd have an understanding of what God intended from the very beginning, right? Go ahead, Mike.
That's one of the reasons why Genesis is so important.
Yeah.
It begins in terms of how we look at where we came from and what becomes then our understanding of who we are.
Yeah.
Based in creation by God rather than evolution, which is that other track alongside of it that says gender is a cultural thing.
Right.
If we have a biblical worldview, it's very clear that male and female is what he made us. Yeah. And that doesn't change. Yeah. That's not something that's just fluid and you can make up your own mind about what you're going to think about that or who you are. We're made in his image, but we're made male and female in his image.
Right.
So that's an important, it is everything in terms of understanding who we are and the world.
Yeah, and we won't get to it now, but you might recall when Jesus was questioned about, whose husband will she be in heaven, right? And in eternity. And Jesus talks about marriage there. And so there's very little, we get into these arguments about what marriage is and, okay, so when can you remarry and all those things. It all connects back to Jesus uses the Old Testament scriptures to connect back to what God intended from the beginning was one man and one woman together. And that is what we know as marriage, a husband and a wife. All right, we won't get too belabored in that for the sake of time, but is there anything from chapter 1 and chapter 2 that we have not covered that you want to make note of now? Anything that you find interesting or important other than what we've already discussed, if you were here last time? Is there anything else that you want to add from the chapter that you find significant or important? What about the rivers and Eden? Have you looked at that before? How many rivers were there? It's around verse 10 of chapter 2. Anybody know? 4, right? Yeah, 4. There are four rivers, and they flowed. Basically, if I'm picturing it correctly, they all flowed out of Eden, correct? And so I picture Eden as this central location, and life is what do rivers bring, right? Life, right? So they're bringing life to the entire region where Eden was. And I'm not going to get into it. I started looking into where was the garden. Oh, that can have fun. It's interesting. I think it's neat. I don't find it I don't find it very important. Where was it exactly? And proofing it, some people do, and I'm not saying you're wrong if you do. Personally, I don't get too excited about that. I think it's neat, but if you want to look into that, I would recommend it. It's kind of interesting. But figuring out the rivers, some of the rivers still exist, obviously, and I think 2 of the rivers exist, and 2 of them are no longer. But the other question I wanted to ask or thought was, where did it go? Have you ever thought about that?
Where did
Eden go? Yeah, where did the garden go?
The weeds.
Into weeds? Because there was no man to tend it after they were kicked out? It's an interesting thought. I didn't think about that.
It's likely to change.
Likely changed. Something changed. Yeah. Well, we had the flood too.
So it's still where it always was.
Yeah.
It's just not necessarily identifiable.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and as we'll see later, we have the flood, which undoubtedly changed the surface of the earth as well, right? So what was changed there, we don't know. But again, more interesting things you can look up that I don't want to get too deep into. But go ahead, Mike.
I do think it's important to notice that Adam was given the charge, and Eve with him too, of tending the garden, caring for it. And that, I think, expands beyond the Garden of Eden to the purpose that man has been given.
Yeah.
We still talk about laboring by the sweat of our brow, but we also should think about stewardship of the garden. That is our earth, and that he's made for us to inhabit.
Yeah.
And, so,
Well, we can make a connection to today, as we'll see, as we've seen with Acts and Christ establishing his church. God, from the beginning, God has always intended on putting man in to have charge of something, right? We don't just exist with this kind of nomad, wander the earth type lifestyle. We have a purpose and we have a reason, a function, right, in his kingdom. So he did it in Genesis, and he does today. He gives us reasonable intentions and things that he wants us to do. Cain was made, we'll see, made kind of a wanderer. But anyways.
I was just following up, but let them rule over the fish of the sea.
Yeah, have dominion
over
and
the
rule.
birds. Yeah. So we have a responsibility to tend those things, to use them but not misuse.
Yeah. All right, so we're into Genesis. We're going to be getting into 3 here. Hopefully you've read through 3. If you haven't, do that afterwards today, maybe in the passing time or something. We're at home. But I asked a couple of things. I asked you to find the references to serpents and snakes. There's a lot of them. Bring them with you. So, seeing if you find anything that connects or is interesting to you. We can make some connections to serpents later in the New Testament as well. We will. And then I asked you to list all the results or consequences of the first sin, which we'll see here in chapter 3. And then I asked you to find biblical references back to the first sin. Be prepared to discuss. So references to this first sin occur throughout the Bible, other than just Genesis and other than just Romans chapter 5. So where are they? What do they say? And discuss those. And then we had some questions that we're going to talk about. The tactics that the serpent used. I find the dialogue between God and Adam interesting, and I wanted to see what you saw. And then how did man become like one of us? 3:22 we see God saying that. And what significance do you find in the end, the last verse of the chapter? So let's get into, just real quick, what happens in chapter 3. I think we all know it well enough. But if you could summarize it in a couple of words, does somebody want to do that? Just for maybe people that are listening online as well. What was the summary of chapter 3 in a few words? Go ahead, Chris.
My title of it says the fall.
The fall of man. Yeah, that's what a lot of Bibles title it. Yep. People call it the fall, right? Have you ever heard that description before? The fall of man or the fall? Okay. I don't think it's too bad of a description. Sometimes I like those, sometimes I don't like those. But that one's pretty accurate, right? The first sin, the first mistake, right? The first error that's made. First disobedience, Adam and Eve sinning, and then, as we'll see, in the end of the chapter, Adam and Eve being removed or kicked out, right? Out of the garden, and God stations cherubim and flaming swords to guard the way. So are they allowed, were they ever going to get back in? Not with that. I don't know about you, but I don't, we can look at some writings about cherubim and what they might have looked like, but even the flaming sword, I'm good. I'm staying out if I'm them too.
Yeah. So God set the planets and the earth in order,
Yep.
all of those things. And so they operate according to his divine order, providence, and
Yes.
power. Man operates by free will within that.
Within, correct, yes.
But the law that he's given, so that's the law. We call that the law of nature, right? Those other things. So then he's given a law. We didn't talk about it from the second chapter, but don't eat of that tree. There was 2 trees in the garden. So when we get to the 3rd chapter, we see the violation of law, but we first need to see that law was in place.
Yeah.
That he intended that we would be ordered, that we would live ordered lives according to his law. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. The chapter being called the fall, this is the first, as we said, that we say the first sin. In order to have that transgression, we need to understand that there was a rule or order or law to begin with. And so, we're going to see in chapter 3 here that there's deception that's happening. And I like how you worded that, Mike, that we exist within his order and his design. And so man was existing in that within the garden. And unfortunately, due to some deception, Adam and Eve, and I'll lump them together. Sometimes more blame gets put on Eve, right? But Adam and Eve together decided to, however you want to word it, go against, to sin, to transgress, to whatever words you want to use there as synonyms, God's law. And so, yes, the end of chapter 2, God put man in the garden in 15, and he said, from any tree you can eat, but from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you shall not eat. And so right there we see the first law that's given in chapter 2. All right, so let's get into some of our material then. The serpents. Are there other serpents in the Bible that you have read about or other uses of it? Were any of them intriguing to you? Or can you think of any? If you didn't look it up, maybe just think of them. Any that intrigue you or stand out to you? Just curious.
Yes.
Did you find any? Well, maybe I should ask this before we. Did you find any good serpents? Okay, go ahead, Mike. With your what intrigues you?
Oh, well, I looked at several. Of course, Moses and Aaron with Pharaoh. Aaron's rod turned into a serpent.
Exodus
and
7.
I wonder with each of these, and good question you raised, but so that serpent in Genesis seems to reflect through the rest of these serpents. They bite and they destroy, right?
Yeah.
These ordinary serpents now. Yep. And so in the wilderness, when the serpents bit the Israelites and Moses raised up the standard, on a standard, the serpent, so that they could look at it. Of course, in the New Testament, we have that connected with Jesus, right? So I know you're intending to do that, and I'll let you answer that part of it, but to look ahead. But then with that serpent, it's interesting too that Moses raised up. Later on, Hezekiah destroys that. Remember, it was called Nehushtan.
I don't remember that one.
Yeah, because they had made it into an idol.
Oh, yeah.
And so the serpent in that instance becomes an idol. And what does the devil represent? A false god, in a sense, right? I mean, we talk about that all the time, but that's what that becomes. Those things that compete with God, God's law, that's worshiping another god if we fall into those things, right? Idolatry. Yeah. So those are some connections, but
Amanda, do you have a comment?
In Matthew 10:16,
yeah,
where it says, "Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of the wolves. Therefore, be as wise as serpents and harmless as doves." Yeah. Just the wise as serpents.
Well,
was
because the serpent is seen throughout. Well, it's from Genesis and all throughout the Bible. I think not wise in a good way, but kind of what are other words we could use?
Cunning.
Crafty and cunning.
Shrewd. Yeah, cunning.
What's that? Shrewd, right? I think that's in our translation of that passage, right? Shrewd. Yeah, no, that's great. 10:16. I just found it interesting to look through. I have a whole list of them, and it's fun just kind of reading through them all and what the serpents, do and how they're used in various parts of the Bible. Obviously, there's really nothing much to the positive that I could find about serpents, right? And I think it's interesting, and I think it's intentional that serpents have been used throughout. And why, I always find it interesting why do so many people have why do we have such a strong aversion to snakes and serpents, right? Some people that really like them, I don't know. Weird. Personally, I just can't. I cannot. I think it is you're fighting our natural reaction that God has made us is to stay away from them, right from Genesis 1, after that fall. But anyhow, I think you have to overcome that to even enjoy them. But most of all of everything that I can find of references to serpents, other than you might think of Moses lifting the serpent up on the staff, which we'll get to, that would be the only thing maybe in a positive light, but we'll remember, and we'll see in a second, Moses wasn't lifting that serpent up in a positive thing, but to remind them of their sin and their iniquity and their transgression against God, and for them to be healed. They were healed when they looked at it, but it was really to remind them why God sent those serpents, right? So anyways, there's nothing good about them. Our Savior himself also used that language in the New Testament. Do you know, other than the word serpent, the brood of vipers is used several times, right? You remember those references? And so that's referred to a lot of times, or directed at rather, a lot of times the scribes and Pharisees and the Jewish order of that time as a brood of vipers. And so you picture just a pit of snakes, right? And they're
And the whitewash tombs.
you whitewash tombs. What good are just a really strong picture that's given with the serpents. Okay, go ahead, Mike.
I just tend to draw things out with sort of metaphors too, but
Yeah.
that comes from sermons. But you can make a good sermon, I think, out of the serpents for obvious reasons. But I thought about, what about them? It's kind of, my mind went quickly back to something happened with Julia with a harmless garter snake, a garden snake. She didn't see it that way. But
Even though they're harmless, I
so
still make
but I think of people keeping snakes, and I thought, well, I've known of people, a friend of mine had a boa constrictor. That snake will strangle you.
Yeah.
So they're not harmless because they don't bite or have venom in their
they can
fangs.
still,
They will kill you.
Yeah.
But you think about Satan sometimes just doesn't bite you and kill you; he strangles you.
Yeah.
Also things like that.
Oh, that's great.
Imagine.
No, we see in chapter 3, what did the serpent bring? They do today. If you get bit by the wrong one, what's it? Death, right? So right from that start, the serpent is meant to show us and associate death, and we'll look at that after we get going here with the consequences. But the serpent brings death, right? But we'll see in Genesis 3 here in 15. He shall bruise your head, and he shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel. And so we're going to see our connection to Jesus here in a moment. That the serpent is going to there's going to be victory over that serpent through the Christ. Let's look at that Numbers reference since it's come up so many times here. Numbers chapter 21. That's where the people where God sent serpents in Numbers chapter 21, 6 through 9. God sent these fiery serpents among the people. They bit the people, and so many of them died, is what it says in 21 and 6. And so as we mentioned already, I'm trusting that you maybe know this story already, and if you don't, look it up and read it. Again, Numbers 21. And God tells Moses to make a fiery serpent, he says, and put it on a standard. I just picture some sort of a pole or a stick or something, right? So he fashions this, right? And whoever looks at it, he will live. And so it's interesting here that the serpent itself is not used for healing. Moses' standard is used for healing, right? But the serpent is wrapped around that standard, whatever. The people look at that and they see and they remember that sin. And I think that's an incredible example here all throughout the scriptures. I think it's every time we see serpents come up, I think it's intentional a lot of times to remind us about that fallen man, about that sin, about being deceived, about disobeying what God has instructed us about breaking or transgressing his law, and that we need to be healed and that we need to return to him. And so, of course, with the Numbers example, in the New Testament, we see that in Romans chapter 5, yeah, is that where it is in Romans chapter 5? The Son of Man's lifted up?
Oh, 3.
3.
John. 3.
John 3, thank you. So in John 3, we'll see it used here. Let's see.
14.
Thank you. John 3:14, Jesus references this and makes this comparison. As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up. So however you want to picture it, the serpent being on a standard, the Son of Man being on a cross, right, lifted up on a cross. I think that's the reference or the image that Jesus is trying to give us. As he lifted him up, even so the Son of Man must be lifted up, and whoever believes in him will have eternal life. And so Jesus makes this connection that, look, God has allowed this serpent to bite you. God has allowed this sin to bite you, but God, I have given you a solution. I've given you salvation. I've given you healing, right? I've given you healing from this. And so just like we see in chapter 3, what's troubling about chapter 3 is for a lot of people can be, have you ever had this thought? Why would God do that? Have you ever had that thought? And so we can be troubled by that. Why would he do that? He allows free will. That's the beauty of it. So the trouble is we initially look at it, people look at it and say, I can't believe God would do something like that. He would have a serpent that would deceive his creation. But without that, we really don't have this concept of choice or free will, do we? So we need this concept of choice and free will is super important. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty glad to have it. Okay, otherwise we would just be, walking little robots, I guess, right? So we have this ability of free choice, and it's really powerful. But as God did in the wilderness there in Numbers, he gave the people a solution to that. You've made a mistake. I've sent these serpents to punish you, but he gives Moses that solution. And so again, in the New Testament, the connections between the Old and the New, that was all done, I think, at that time to point towards what was going to be happening in the future, which would be a sacrifice once and for all in Jesus, right? And so that's that picture that we see between John here and we see between Genesis. Easy to remember, which I couldn't at the time, but chapter 3 and chapter 3, right? Two easy chapters to remember. But anything you want to comment on that connection of the serpent and the staff before we move on? Anything, other comments that you have for it that you want to share? I got my notes out of order here. All right, so what were the consequences then? Let's get back to chapter 3. I think that's where we're next. Any consequences you can see? Don't just say death. We already know that one.
I was wondering in what context you asked that question.
Genesis chapter 3, 14 through 15.
In context from, I had two answers.
Well, there's lots of context. Yeah, I agree. I left it pretty open because you could really go crazy.
Everything negative that's been sinful from garden until today.
All right, good.
Those are the consequences.
Yes. There is a very open question. You could look at it for mankind as a whole. You could look at it for Adam and Eve and the serpent, right? So there's lots of ways, yes. How did you take it? Did you take it right there from 3, or did you expound to the rest of the known world from all time, right? How about just 14 through 15 right in there? Go ahead.
I was going to say that God told them what the consequences were when he gave the command.
Yeah.
Or the law.
Right.
In the day you eat it, you shall die. So that's, you
Yeah,
said, don't say death,
yeah.
but that's the beginning of it. And then, of course, the many things that follow from that. But there are a host of consequences. But in chapter 3, they're cast out of the garden.
Right. Yeah. So they're told. I'm glad you answered that way. They were told what was going to happen, and what happened is what was told, right? There are also just other consequences and results. So what I wanted to do with point out to this is, sin can have a web. Sin in our lives, we can have a web of consequences, other than maybe just the immediate consequence, right? Or the eternal consequence. There could be even more. So, looking at chapter 14. Looking at chapter 3, verse 14, because you've done this, cursed are you above all livestock. You've done this, cursed are you more than all cattle. There's number one. This is for the consequences for the serpent. Excuse me, I didn't start with that. On your belly you will go. You'll eat dust, and dust you will eat all the days of your life. So that's consequences for the serpent, right? I'll put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. He will bruise you on the head. So this is the seed of woman pointing to Christ, and you shall bruise him on the heel. Consequences for the woman, verse 16. I'll multiply your pain in childbirth, and in pain you'll bring forth children. Yet your desire will be for your husband. And then verse 17 gets into the consequences for Adam. Curses the ground because of you. In toil, you will eat of it. In pain, pain and toil, you should eat of it all your days of your life. Depends on the translations that you have. Thorns and thistles will grow, right? You will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face, you will eat bread till you return to the ground. Because of it you were taken, because from it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. And that's where death really comes in there. So look at all those consequences as a result of that. It's not just, I'm not trying to negate the importance of it, not just death, but look at all the other consequences that resulted in that as well, right?
Not just consequences. You asked also results. I picked up on Eve's pride in verse 6.
Yeah.
She said she saw that a tree was good for food, it was delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable to make one wise. Yeah. That's how she's looking. Yeah.
Yeah. The results were her pride.
She wanted to be right.
I want to know. I want all knowledge. I want to know what's going on. Yeah. Right. No, I didn't. I mean, I've read that, of course, but I didn't make that connection. Go ahead, Mike.
This is something that often is brought into the context of this discussion, and that is they didn't die in the day they ate of it.
Correct.
They're still alive and cast out of the garden. And so, how do we understand that?
Yeah, not from the immediate punishment versus you mean death as in eternal death.
Well,
or
spiritual
death.
Yeah. So from that day, they essentially were cursed to die.
Right.
Physically.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
returning to dust. Yes. Right.
Yeah. So they're going to die. The body's going to return to the dust. Yeah. But that's not the only way to understand death, biblically speaking. You look at the passage you were referring to earlier in Romans 5. That's the passage that says that the death spread.
Yeah.
So that's, of course, physical death spreads, but from Eden, but spiritual death.
Yeah, in 15, that's interesting because in 17 of chapter 2, he says, "For the day you eat from it, you'll die." But I think there, day he means in that time. Sometimes day is used that way, not specifically that day, but in that day or that time that you do that, you'll die. And we see Adam returning to dust. We're going to get into Romans chapter 5, Mike, and I think that's going to be you next week. Yeah, based on our time. Go ahead, Mike. Or Robert.
Yeah, the serpent is kind of weird how the first two cursed are you more than all cattle, so it's isolationism.
Yeah.
He was isolated from pretty much the rest alone because he was now feared.
Yeah.
Right? So fear brings, everyone Puts their hand out, stay away from you, right? More than all the cattle.
Yeah.
So he has, cattle and herds, they group together and all that, right? So he's kind of a loner and cast away. It's kind of weird how that happened.
All right, so let's do a couple of questions here, and then I think we'll let Mike's going to be teaching next week. I think Mike, if you don't mind, if you would like to bring Romans chapter 5 in and discuss that, I would be grateful for that. For next time, we'll probably look at Romans chapter 5 a little bit. But some of these questions are maybe a little simpler here. The tactic that the serpent used, do you find any significance or importance in that? Has it changed much?
I think what we're reading should be applied to today and what's happening today.
Yeah.
I don't think we mentioned it was to me pointed out anyway that when that there's the I can't even read it now. The pride of her.
Oh yeah, I know.
The lust of her eyes.
Lust of her eyes.
She
Yeah.
saw.
The desirable.
As she saw. Yeah.
Yeah, it's desire.
Really,
yeah.
It's really it's really within. It's part of your life.
Yeah.
So you have a lust of the eyes, that you have a lust of the flesh.
Yep.
Then that's what she saw too. The fruit of it was the
It
flesh.
was good. She
And the
desired it. It was
boastful
good.
pride of life. Those are things we have today.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You look at your marketing situation, your groceries.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Don't
We're gonna
shop
set
hungry.
this out
Right.
Because when somebody sees it, they're going to want it.
Mhm.
That's what
Yeah.
I think is real important.
Yep. No, and that's why I asked this question. The tactics. Has anything changed from the first sin to my sin yesterday or your sin yesterday or whatever? Has anything changed? No. So the tactics, the deception, the desires, or whatever, all that what's happening we see in Genesis, not much has changed. And I'm glad you bring that up. The tactic he used was to deceive her, right? To get her to think about, maybe that is pretty good. And there you go. And it happens. Go ahead, Mike.
I thought about, what he instilled in a sense by raising the question, has God said?
Doubt.
Well, he did say that. She knew he said
Yeah.
that, but did he really mean what he
Yes.
said?
Yeah, this is
And that is his tactic in raising doubt, where faith should be our response. So
Right.
believe it.
Yeah.
But the devil's tactic is it won't really happen as he said. And then when we think about it, it's appointed unto men once to die, and after this the judgment. Do we believe that?
right.
So some doubt.
Will he really do that?
Or that there's life after death.
Will he really send somebody to hell? Because they seem like a nice guy. Yeah. Right. Okay. We're past time, but again, for next week, we'll let Mike can finish up these couple chapters a little bit. Maybe look at Romans 5 and some of the questions. And then if he has time, maybe he'll get into Cain and Abel. But I have a feeling you'll be into that pretty good yet. So I'm sure we'll move on. But be ready with the next one too. Whether that happens next week or when I'm back a week after, you have it so you can be ready for it. So thanks a lot.